The road to Ashfen Crossing takes 3 days from Gravenhold's north gate, and I have had 3 days to rehearse what I would say to her. I have not thought of a single thing worth saying. My advisor Devon rode beside me the first morning and kept his mouth shut for about 4 hours, which is a personal record. Then he said, very carefully, that perhaps I should consider what outcome I was hoping for. I told him I was hoping to not be a fool for the rest of my life. He said that was a worthy ambition, and then he found something to look at on the horizon and did not speak again until camp. My wolf has been perfectly calm for 3 days. That is how I know how badly this could go. After 7 years of circling and refusing and going still at the wrong moments, he has simply settled into his haunches and decided to wait and see if I am capable of not ruining everything again. He has low expectations. I cannot blame him. The story starts in my own hall, which is the embarrassing part. 7 years ago, Senna of the Ashfen border came to Gravenhold on a healer's contract. 6 months, renewable, to manage the wolves in the Eastern Ward. We had 43 wolves at that point, and a bout of frost lung moving through the pack, and the settlement healer my council had been using for a decade had retired. Senna came with a letter from the Border Guild, and a reputation for not losing wolves that everyone else had given up on. She was quiet. She kept to the East Wing. She reorganized the medicine stores in the first 3 days, which my head of staff Aldrich mentioned to me with a tone that meant it was about time someone did. I did not notice her immediately. That is also the embarrassing part. My wolf noticed her on the 3rd day. I was walking the east courtyard at dusk, checking on a wolf I had been worried about, a big gray named Carr who had had the frost lung worst, and she was in the ward with him, her back to me, running her hand along his flank and speaking to him in a low voice. Carr was lying down, which he had not done willingly in 3 weeks. She was not doing anything visibly dramatic. She was just talking to him, and his breathing had gone even and slow, and the whole east yard was quiet in the particular way it gets when something that has been wrong for a long time begins to go right. My wolf went quiet in my chest. Not the restless quiet of a predator watching something move. The deep quiet. The quiet that means the thing you have been looking for has just walked into the room. I stood at the gate of the East Ward for a while. She did not turn around. I left before she did. I told my wolf he was mistaken. He was not impressed by this. He is never impressed by my reasoning when it runs against what he knows, and what he knew from that 3rd evening was perfectly clear. He let me reason at him for about 8 weeks, which is longer than usual, and then he lost patience, and simply sat down in my chest like a stone, and refused to move. She had been at Gravenhold for 2 months by then, and in those 2 months I had watched her work from a careful distance, and convinced myself that the watching was professional interest. The wolves trusted her in a way they had not trusted the previous healer. She knew their names without being told them. She had a way of carrying herself through the East Wing that did not disturb anything. She moved quietly. She spoke quietly. She was never in the wrong place. Aldrich, who does not offer opinions about staff without cause, mentioned once that the East Wing ran better with her in it. I noted this and told myself it had nothing to do with anything. At the end of the 2nd month she came to my study with a report on Carr and the other 3 who had been sickest, all 4 of them fully recovered. She laid the report on my desk and stood and waited for me to read it, and I read it, and when I looked up she was watching me with gray eyes that were calm and direct and gave absolutely nothing away. I said the wolves were looking well. She said they were. I said I hoped the work was satisfactory. She said it was. I said nothing else because I could not think of anything useful to say, which is extremely rare for me. I am the Alpha King of Gravenhold. I have addressed councils in session, arbitrated pact disputes, delivered ultimatums to the Northern Alliance. I could not find a sentence to say to a woman standing in front of my desk looking at me with gray eyes that gave nothing away. She thanked me for my time and left. My wolf made a sound that was as close to laughter as he is capable of. The council brought the alliance match to me 6 weeks after that. I knew it was coming. The Valthrin pack had been angling for a formal treaty for 2 years, and a marriage compact was the cleanest way to seal it. My head of council laid out the terms, and they were sensible terms. I listened to them, and thought about Senna in the East Ward, and said nothing about that, and listened to more terms, and then said I would consider it overnight. That night my wolf sat in my chest like a stone, and pointed in one direction. I told him we could not base a treaty decision on instinct. He pointed in that one direction. I told him we had obligations to the pack. He pointed. He did not say anything else. He has never been interested in the word obligation. I signed the council's match in the morning. The terms were good. The Valthran Alliance would hold the Northern Pass for us through the next decade. I told myself this was kingship. I told myself it was duty. I told myself that an instinct, however strong, was not the same as a decision. I found out later, months later, from Aldrich, because I had not thought to ask, that Senna had been in the East Passage when the council announced the match to the hold that evening. She heard it with everyone else. She did not come to my study. She went back to the East Wing. In the morning she asked Aldrich for a wagon. Aldrich came to me. He stood in my study with a look on his face I have rarely seen on him. Not angry, not afraid, something quieter than either. He said the healer was requesting an early return to Ashven. He said her contract had 2 months remaining. He said he did not believe the early departure was about the wolves. I said nothing for a moment. Then I said to let her go. Aldrich looked at me for a long moment. Then he left. I stood at the study window. It was early morning, cold, the light still thin. I could see the east courtyard from where I stood, and I watched. I told myself I was not watching for anything in particular. And at the 7th hour she came out of the east wing with a single pack, put it in the back of the wagon, climbed up to the bench, and said something to the driver. The wagon moved. She did not look back at the hold. She drove through the north gate, and I watched until the wagon was too small to see, and then I stood at the window for a while longer and told myself I had done the right thing. My wolf did not speak for 2 days after that. When he finally did, it was not with words. It was with a feeling in my chest, like a door closing on a room where something essential had been left behind, and the handle had gone cold, and there was no reason at all to believe the door would open again. I was married to the Valthran Alpha's daughter in the winter. She was a kind woman. She was not Senna. She deserved better than a man whose wolf was still facing the direction of Ashven Crossing. She told me so, with considerable grace, 2 years into it, and asked to be released from the compact with honor. I gave her everything the compact promised and more. I sat with the guilt of that for a long time. I have sat with a great many things for 7 years. The Ashven Crossing settlement is not what I expected. I had expected something modest, a border healer's practice, a house, a small reputation in a small place. What I found when we came around the last bend of the northern road was a settlement that had grown up around whatever Senna had built. There was a proper infirmary, a long building with a covered walkway and a smoke hole in the roof that meant a fire kept going. There was a row of outbuildings, stores, and a stable. There were 3 wolves in the front yard that lifted their heads when our party came into view, and none of them came out growling. One of them, a big silver female, walked toward us a few steps and sat down and looked at me without moving again. Devon said quietly, beside me, that those were healthy wolves. They were. Their coats were right, and their eyes were clear, and they moved like wolves that knew where they stood. You can tell a great deal about a healer by the condition of the wolves in her care, and what the wolves at Ashven Crossing told me in the first 2 minutes was that she had not wasted any of the 7 years I had spent telling myself it was fine. I dismounted at the gate. The young man who came out to meet us was one of Senna's apprentices. He told me without quite saying it, that the healer was in the infirmary with a patient and would be done within the hour, and did we want to wait in the common room. We waited. Devon found himself a cup of something and a chair. Aldrich, who had come with me from Gravenhold and is a practical man in all situations, stood near the window and looked at the outbuildings with the expression of someone cataloging what was well organized. She came in from the infirmary side, still pulling on a clean outer wrap. She stopped when she saw me. For a moment she looked at me with those gray eyes, and I could not read them any better than I could 7 years ago. Then she said, "Alpha King." I said, "Senna." She said, "I didn't know to expect you." I said I had not known how to write the letter. She looked at me for a moment longer, the way you look at something you are deciding how much time to give it. Then she said, "I have half an hour before I need to check on the patient again. You can tell me what you came for." She did not say it unkindly. She did not say it warmly. She said it the way a woman says something true when she has no reason to perform anything for the man in front of her. And it hit me somewhere in the chest, because I had spent 7 years imagining various versions of this conversation, and none of them had sounded like that. None of them had sounded so completely free of me. We sat in the common room, and she poured water from a jug and offered me a cup, and I looked at her and told myself to say something real. I said I had come because I had been wrong. She said yes. I said I had signed an alliance match because I told myself it was duty, and I had watched her leave because I told myself it was necessity, and I had spent 7 years governing my wolf and calling it wisdom. She said, "And you've come now." I said yes. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the cup in her hands. The silver wolf had come in from outside and settled near the door, and she glanced at it the way you glance at something you trust, and then she looked back at me. She said, "7 years is a long time to be wrong." I said I was aware of that. She said, "What is it you expect me to do with you arriving at my door?" I said I had not come with expectations. I had come because I could not go on not coming. I said that was probably not a compelling argument. I said I was aware that it was not her job to make it easier for me. She looked at me with those gray eyes and did not say anything for a moment, and my wolf sat in my chest and was absolutely still. Then she said, "You can have the cottage at the west end of the settlement for a week. There's a problem with the pass wolves I could use another pair of hands on. If you're going to be here, you might as well be useful." I said that was acceptable. She stood and picked up her cup and said she needed to get back to her patient. She paused at the doorway and said, without turning around, "I'm not angry at you, Aldrin. I haven't been angry in a long time, but I'm also not the woman who sat quietly while you decided what to do with her. You should know that before you stay." Then she went back through the infirmary door, and I sat in the common room with the silver wolf watching me from the door, and Davin at my shoulder, with the careful neutrality of a man who has very strong opinions and has decided not to voice them, and the particular feeling of a man who has just been told the truth by someone who owed him nothing and said it anyway. I stayed. The Pass Wolves were a clan of 12 who had been ranging too far south in the late season, coming into range of the border settlements in ways that worried Senna's apprentices. She thought they were following a food source that was moving, which meant the broader ecosystem of the pass was shifting, which was a problem she needed to map before the winter proper. She had been going up to the pass in pairs with her apprentices, observing and recording. She let me come on the second day, not because I asked, but because she looked at me over the morning meal and said she had a long walk planned, and I looked like a man who needed something to do. We walked 4 hours into the pass. She did not make conversation as a courtesy. She spoke when there was something to say, and was quiet when there was not. And after the first hour, I stopped trying to fill the silence and simply walked beside her and found that the silence was comfortable in the way silences are comfortable between people who have no need to perform for each other. She knew the pass. She knew the rock outcroppings and the water sources, and which slopes the wolves used for cover and which they avoided. She crouched near a set of tracks in a hollow below a windbreak of spruce and read them with complete attention, touching the ground lightly and then rocking back on her heels and looking at the angle of the slope. She noted things in a small book. She spoke occasionally to her apprentice Baron about what she was seeing, the size of the rear paw relative to the front, the depth of the lead wolf's stride, the way the clan had swung wide of a spring that would have been their usual water stop. Once she spoke to me directly. She asked what my pack's range looked like at the northernmost boundary, and I told her, and she listened with her head slightly tilted and asked 2 follow-up questions that were exactly the right 2 questions. How deep did the winter patrol go? Whether we tracked the prey herds or held a fixed boundary. She made a note and did not comment further, but I could see what she was fitting together in her mind, the piece of the map she had been missing. On the walk back, she said, without looking at me, that Gravenhold's North Range and the Pass Wolves' Southern Drift were going to create a conflict within 2 seasons if nothing shifted. She said it the way she said other things, directly, without a hedge, and without softening it for the fact that I was the one responsible for the North Range. I said I could adjust the range patrols. She said that would help but not solve it. She said the Pass Wolves were moving because something on the high plateau had shifted, and patrolling a line was not the same as understanding what was moving. I said I could send a rangekeeper to consult with her on a regular schedule. She looked at me sideways and said, or you could solve it at the source, which I've been trying to get the Northern Hold to do for 3 years, but the Northern Hold hasn't answered my letters. I said that the Northern Hold had a new head of correspondence. She said very dryly, he's doing an excellent job. I almost smiled. I did not, quite, but she caught something in my face and looked away, and I thought she almost smiled too. That was the 3rd day. On the 4th day, I repaired a section of fence on the east side of the infirmary yard that had been loose since I arrived. The post anchor had rusted and worked itself out of the ground, and every time the wind came off the pass, the whole panel shuddered. I noticed it on the first morning, and there was no reason not to fix it. I found a replacement anchor in the north store and spent the morning driving it in. Aldrich, who has been with me for 20 years and knows when to simply be helpful, spent the morning with Senna's supply apprentice reviewing what they needed for winter stock, which I had not asked him to do but which seemed like the kind of thing that wanted doing. Senna found me at the fence at midday. She stood and looked at what I was doing for a moment. I had the panel back in position and was testing the anchor with my weight, and then she handed me a cup of something hot without comment and waited while I drank it. I said the east post needed new anchor bolts as well, properly fitted, before the deep winter set in, and asked if the supply list Aldrich was working through could include them. She said it could. She said it had been on her list for 2 seasons, and there had been other things. I said I understood. I handed the cup back. She said, "You're different than I expected." I said I hoped that wasn't a complaint. She said, "No, I thought you would come and be a king at me. You're being a person." I said I had been a king at the wrong moments for most of my life and had decided to try something else. She looked at me with those gray eyes for a moment, and there was something in them that was not quite warmth but was not nothing either. Then she took the empty cup and went back inside. The silver wolf followed me to the north store when I went to find the proper-sized bolts and sat outside it and waited until I came back out. On the 5th day, she took me with her to see the pack. The 12 pass wolves ranged along the high shoulder of the second ridge, and we sat at a distance and watched them for 2 hours without disturbing them, and she described what she was seeing in a quiet voice that carried no more than it needed to in the cold air. There was a young male who was ranging differently than the others. She had been watching him for 3 weeks, and she believed he was thinking about splitting from the clan, which would change their ranging pattern considerably. There was an older female who was limping on the left rear leg, and Senna had been trying to determine for a fortnight whether the limp was old injury or new. She said there was a difference in how the wolf moved when it thought no one was watching, and that she had been sitting in the spruce hollow for 3 mornings, trying to catch the unguarded version. She said the guarded version was favoring the leg deliberately. The unguarded version was less consistent about it. I said that sounded like an old wound that had healed badly and was being managed rather than treated. She looked at me. I said I had seen it in Gravenhold's wolves, after a bad winter 2 years back. She might be able to get close enough for a proper look if she came upwind on the east approach. The lead female had a den on that side, and she was already accustomed to that scent. Senna was quiet for a moment. She looked at the limping wolf, then back at me. She said, "The east approach. I hadn't tried that." She made a note. She did not say thank you, and she did not perform gratitude. She simply noted it as a useful piece of information and folded it into what she knew. I watched the wolves. I watched her watching the wolves. My wolf in my chest had been still for 5 days in the way he gets still when he is absolutely certain and has nothing to prove. On the walk back, she said, without particular inflection, "Your wolf has been very quiet." I said yes. She said, "Mine has not." I looked at her. She was looking at the path ahead, her face composed, her step steady on the loose shale. She said, "I want you to know I'm aware of that. It doesn't mean I've decided anything." I said I understood. She said, "I'm not going to be something you collect when you've finally gotten around to it." I said she was not. I said I had not come to collect anything. I had come because I had been wrong, and because being wrong for 7 years seemed like enough time to be wrong, and because I had no better argument than that, but I also had no more excuses. She walked for a moment in silence. The wind came off the upper ridge and the spruce trees on either side of the track moved in it, and the air smelled of cold stone and pine. She said, "Tell me what it cost you, the decision you made." I thought about that. I thought about my wolf going silent for 2 days after her wagon cleared the north gate. I thought about the marriage that had been honest but not right, and the woman who had deserved better, and the grace with which she had asked to leave. I thought about the cold handle of the closed door and the way I had stood at the study window, watching something get too small to see, and called it duty. I said it cost me the only thing that had ever gone completely quiet in my chest, and that I had spent 7 years calling the restlessness something else. I said it cost a woman who deserved a whole man, and that was a debt I had settled in goods and titles, and would never settle in the way that mattered. I said it cost the 6 months she gave to Gravenhold's wolves, which she had given honestly, and which I had repaid by letting a council match override what I already knew. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said quietly, "It cost me the same." She did not say it with grief or with complaint. She said it the way she said the limping wolf was managing an old wound. Directly, without performance. As a fact, that was what it was. We walked the rest of the way back without speaking, and it was not a difficult silence. On the 6th evening, I sat in the small common room after the settlement had gone to rest, and I wrote the letter to the northern hold that had been 3 years owed. I wrote it in full and clearly, and made the commitments that should have been made in the first year of the range conflict. A formal consultation arrangement, a route keeper to report to Ashfen, a share of the winter patrol data going both directions. I wrote it the way Senna described what she observed, without a hedge, without a softening, stating what was true and what needed to happen. Then I wrote to my head of council at Gravenhold about the Passwolf situation and what Senna had mapped and what needed to change on our end. This letter was longer. I described what I had seen in 5 days at Ashfen Crossing, the quality of the work, the scope of the mapping, the degree to which the border healing operation had become something Gravenhold should have been formally supporting for years. I described it as what it was, a matter of pack health for the entire northern range, and a professional relationship that the hold had been negligent to leave informal. I did not write to anyone about Senna herself. That was not a letter I knew how to write yet. What I knew was that I was still here and that she had not asked me to leave, and that my wolf had been still in the particular way he gets still, when something that has been missing for a very long time is close enough to touch. On the 7th morning I came down to find her already in the infirmary yard, checking on a wolf she had been watching overnight, a border wolf that had come in with a leg injury 4 days ago. The silver female was with her. The morning was cold and clear and the light was coming sideways through the pass in that way it does in late season, everything very specific, every detail exact, the frost on the fence posts and the shape of the spruce line against the sky all equally present. She looked up when I came out. I said I had written the letters. She said she had seen the lamp in the common room late. I said I had also written to my council about formalizing the Ashfen arrangement. I said it was long overdue and I had said so plainly, and I thought the council would not argue because the practical case was clear. She looked at me for a moment. She said, "You could have done that 3 years ago, when I first wrote to the hold." I said yes. She said, "Why didn't you?" I said because in 3 years I had not found a way to write to Ashfen Crossing about anything at all without having to think about the rest of it, and I had not been ready to think about the rest of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's honest." I said it was the best I had. She stood with her hands wrapped around a cup and looked at me. The silver wolf sat between us, watching both of us with the particular patience that wolves have when they already know the outcome and are simply waiting for the people involved to get there. She said, "You know what's happening." I said I did. She said, "I can feel it too. I felt it for 6 days, probably longer, probably since you came through the gate, if I'm honest." I said I knew. She said, "That doesn't make it simple." I said no. She said, "I built this." She gestured, a small motion that took in the infirmary, and the yard, and the outbuildings, and the settlement beyond them. "I built this without you. I am not missing anything, Aldrin. I want you to understand that before you say anything else." I said I understood that. I said I had seen it in the 5 days I had been here, and it was exactly what I had expected of her, and I was not here to fix anything that was not broken. She said, "Then what are you offering?" I said I was offering to stop being the man who let her wagon clear the north gate and called it duty. I said I was offering to be whatever she needed me to be that was not that man. I said I did not know exactly what that looked like yet, but I was willing to find out, and I was not going to sign any more council matches as a substitute for being honest about what my wolf had been telling me since the 3rd evening of a healer's contract 7 years ago. She looked at me for a long moment. The light was exactly that particular late-season light, very clear and very still, every detail of the yard present and exact, and the silver wolf did not move. Then she took a step toward me and held out her hand. I took it. The mate mark came the way I should have expected it would come. Not a blaze, not a ceremonial fire, nothing like what I had imagined in the anxious versions of this moment that I had run through in the 3 days riding north. It came as a warmth that spread up my arm and across my chest and settled behind my ribs like something coming to rest after a very long time in motion. Like a door finally, completely, closing in its frame. On her wrist the mark was the same one that had been on mine in a faint shadow for 7 years, now clear and certain. The two wolves side by side, flanks angled slightly toward each other, blue-gray and still in the morning light. She looked at it for a moment. She did not look startled. She looked like a woman who has been expecting something and is deciding what to do with it now that it has arrived. She said, "That's been there all this time." I said yes. She said, "Yours too?" I said yes. I said it had come the morning she left Gravenhold, and I had been calling it something else ever since. She looked at the mark for a moment longer, then she looked up at me. She said, "I'm going to finish my rounds." I said, "All right." She said, "You can come with me if you want." I said I would. She turned toward the infirmary, and I walked beside her, and the silver wolf fell in on her other side, and the morning was still and cold and exact, and my wolf in my chest was so quiet he had almost stopped being a thing I was aware of, because that is what quiet feels like when it finally becomes something other than the absence of noise. We walked the rounds. She checked on the wolf she had been watching overnight. His leg was better, the swelling down, and then we went north to the second outbuilding, where 2 more were recovering from a border injury. She checked them methodically, spoke to Baron about the treatment schedule, made notes in her small book. I handed her things when she needed them and stayed out of her way when she did not. The silver wolf stayed near. When we came out into the yard again, she said, without looking at me, "I'm not moving to Gravenhold." I said I had not expected her to. She said, "Whatever this is, it starts here. With what I've built." I said that was right. She said, "Then you'll need to talk to your council about what that means for the Hold's Alpha King." I said I had been planning to. I said Gravenhold needed a border healing agreement with Ashfen that had been owed for years, and that the Passwolf mapping she had done was more valuable than anything my rangekeepers had produced in the last decade, and that there were extremely practical reasons for the Alpha King of Gravenhold to have a formal relationship with the healer at Ashfen Crossing that had nothing at all to do with the mate mark on both our wrists. She looked at me sideways. She said, "That is a very political way to describe this." I said I was a king. Political was the only language my council would accept for the first conversation. She said, "And what language are you using for this?" She held up her wrist, the mark clear in the morning light. I said I was using the language of a man who made a mistake for 7 years and would like to spend the rest of his life not making it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's the first thing you've said that sounds like you rather than a prepared speech." I said I was working on it. She looked at me for a moment with those gray eyes, and I thought I saw something move in them that I had not seen before. Not warm exactly, or not only warm, but something that was genuinely deciding, the way she decided things, with her full attention, without rush, without performance. She said, "Come in for breakfast." We went in. Later she showed me what she had mapped of the Passwolf range. We spread the charts on the common room table and she walked me through them, the seasonal movements, the clan's denning patterns, the water sources they relied on, the prey corridors that were shifting and why. She was a thorough teacher when she decided you were worth teaching. She did not repeat herself and she did not simplify. And when I asked a question, she answered it completely, and then asked one back that made clear she was also gauging what I knew. We worked through the early afternoon on what the agreement with Gravenhold needed to contain, and I wrote it out in a form I could bring back to the council, and she read it and made 3 changes that were all improvements, cleaner language in 2 places, and a specification in the 3rd that I had left vague and should not have. I incorporated them and she read it again and said it would do. When we finished, she straightened the charts and said, "Very ordinarily, you'll stay the night and leave in the morning?" I said yes. She said, "Good. I need to know what Gravenhold's Northgate census looks like in the last 3 years. You can have your secretary send it." I said I would. She said, "And tell your council the Passwolf situation is a pack health issue, not a territorial one. They'll argue about territory for months. They won't argue about health." I said that was good counsel. She said, "I've been doing this for 7 years. I know how councils work." I said I had noticed. She gathered the charts and turned toward the shelving where she kept them. Ordered by season and year, each one labeled in her hand. I watched her work, the particular economy of it, the way she moved as if everything she needed was exactly where she had put it, because it was, because she had put it there and remembered where. I said her name. She turned. I said I knew I had no right to ask what she had done with the 7 years beyond what I had seen. I said I also knew she had built something real, and that it would have happened without me, and would go on with or without me, and that was not a thing I was going to be foolish enough to resent. I said I only wanted to know if there was room in what she had built for a man who was trying to be the right version of himself, and who was willing to learn what that looked like from her. She held the charts and looked at me for a moment. She said, "There might be." She said it the way she said everything, directly, without performing more than she meant. She was not offering certainty. She was not closing a door. She was saying what was true, which was that there might be room, and that she would find out, and that she was under no obligation to do it on anyone's schedule but her own. I said I could work with that. She put the charts away and said she needed to see about the evening feeding, and I said I would help, and she said all right. We fed the wolves. In the evening she sat by the fire in the common room and I sat across from her, and we talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular. The pass, the settlement's winter plans, a dispute in my northern range that I had been trying to resolve for a year, and which she identified the source of in about 10 minutes. A technique she had developed for frost lung that the Border Guild wanted to document, and which I told her Gravenhold would pay to have trained properly into our eastern ward. The silver wolf slept between us. The fire was good. Outside the settlement was quiet in the late-season way, sound carrying far and clear in the cold, the pass very still beyond the outbuildings. At some point, she said, looking at the fire, "I used to think about what I would say to you if you came." I said, "What did you decide?" She said, "Nothing useful. Every version of it wanted something from you I wasn't sure you had." I said, "And now?" She looked at the mark on her wrist. The firelight made it look warm. She said, "Now I think you might have it. I'm not certain yet." I said I understood. She said, "I'm not in a hurry." I said I wasn't either. She looked at the fire for a moment. She said, "You should know, I'm not going to bow." I said I knew. She said, "Not to the council, not to pack expectation, not to whatever shape this is supposed to take according to how things are done at Gravenhold." I said I had not come asking for that. She said, "I know. I'm saying it anyway, so there's no confusion later, when your council has opinions." I said my council could be managed. She said, with the slight dryness she used when she found something accurate but predictable, "They always have opinions." I said yes. I said I intended to present them with the practical agreement first, and let them settle into it before any further conversations. She said, "That's sensible." I said she had given me good counsel all week. She said, quietly, "You didn't used to ask for counsel." I said no. She said, "What changed?" I thought about that. I thought about the door closing cold. I thought about the 7 years of calling the wrong thing the right name. I said that, at some point, I ran out of reasons to trust my own judgment in isolation, and the alternative was to find someone whose judgment I trusted instead. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "You trust mine?" I said yes. She looked at me for a long moment. The fire had settled lower and the room was warm. She said quietly, "Good." We sat for a while longer and said nothing, and the wolf shifted in her sleep, and outside the pass was cold and still, and the night was very clear. The next morning I rode out of Ashfen, crossing with the agreement folded in my pack and 2 letters to send ahead, and a route plan for a second visit in 6 weeks. She stood at the gate when I left. The silver wolf sat beside her. She did not walk me out in a way that meant anything formal. She was simply there, because the gate was near the infirmary yard and she had morning rounds to finish. She said, "Ride safely." I said I would. I rode north. At the first ridge I looked back. She had already gone back inside. My wolf was quiet in my chest, in the way that is not the absence of something, but the presence of something that has finally found its place. Not the cold quiet of a door closed on an empty room, the warm quiet of a door that has been left open on purpose. I rode on toward Gravenhold, and the morning was very clear, and the pass was blue in the early light, and 7 years of calling the wrong thing by the right name had finally come to an end. The settlement at Ashfen Crossing does not need the Alpha King of Gravenhold to make it whole. She built it and she runs it, and it will outlast both of us. What I am, in relation to it, is a man who arrived late and was given the chance to be useful, and who is spending the rest of his life making sure that chance was not wasted. She told me she is not in a hurry. Neither am I. The mark on my wrist is clear and certain now, and hers matches it, and what we are building is not a ceremony or a declaration but something quieter than that. A border agreement, a supply arrangement for the infirmary, a regular route between Gravenhold and Ashfen, a habit of two people who have found they do their best thinking when the other one is in the room. The silver wolf, Devon tells me, was sitting at the gate again when he rode through last week carrying the census records she asked for. He says it followed the wagon to the infirmary yard and sat outside while they unloaded and did not leave until the wagon was empty. I told him that sounded about right. She has not bowed to anything, and she will not. She built her life the way she maps the pass, methodically, in full knowledge of what the terrain requires, without asking anyone's permission. The fated bond found her anyway, and she is deciding what to do with it at her own pace. And I am learning that the pace of a woman who spent 7 years building something real without you is not a pace you get to rush. I do not want to rush it. What I want is what I have been given. A second morning at Ashfen Crossing in 6 weeks, and the particular silence of someone who speaks when there is something to say, and a silver wolf who has decided I am acceptable, and enough time to become the version of myself that deserves what she is considering offering. That is more than I earned. It is exactly what I intend to make good use of.